Hi everyone and welcome to another Graphic 45 tutorial from me. This one is forming part of my design team audition for 2016. Yes, I'm going to do it again. I was really disappointed when I didn't get through last time because I did get through to the second round, which is my furthest so far, but you never know. And my son did say to me, Mum, if you don't go for it, you'll always be left wondering. So here I am. So fingers crossed, and this tutorial will form part of that audition. And today I'm going to show you how to look at your papers in your collection and get the most out of them in a canvas like this one. Graphic 45 are well known for all their beautiful patterns and their cut apart pages that have beautiful elements on them that you can cut apart and make into embellishments in their own right, and that's exactly what I've done here. This heart features two papers from old collections. One of them is the Magic of Oz collection Poppy Fields, that's the beautiful poppy paper, and a dotty paper from ABC Primer which is called Bedtime Stories. So have a look through your collections and look for papers that you can do this with. Any kind of pattern could be featured on the wings, and then you want a flower page that you can cut apart and decoupage up those flowers to make them dimensional elements. So this is the Poppy Fields page that I'll be using, and this is the sort of idea that I started out with. We'll see where I end up. The canvas measures 16 inches by 12 inches and is 3/4 of an inch deep, just to give you a guide, but you could easily scale this up or down to make it into the size that you want, bearing in mind what size the flowers are that you're using, and that you might have to scale down the feathers that we're going to make to put together the wings. So I'm starting out by giving this a coat of black chalkboard paint. This is from Faber-Castell, but again, depending on which flowers you've chosen to use, you might want to alter the colour of your background. I'm going to need to give this 2 coats of this chalkboard paint, so I'm going to coat it all over, let it dry, and then coat it a second time. But I think you know how to do that without watching me do it and without watching paint dry, so I'm going to move on to the next step. Whilst that's drying, I'm going to get started making these poppies. I'll be using 2 sheets of the Poppy Fields paper to get the amount of poppies I need to fill the size of heart that I've drawn. So what you're going to do is look at the poppies on your paper, and I think I'm holding this upside down, and you're going to decide which of those poppies are whole, and you're going to cut them out. So that's what I did. I sat down in front of the TV and I cut out an entire page full of poppies, and I've cut them all out, and I'm now going to show you how I look at those flowers, decide what elements I'm going to layer up to make my 3D flower. As I'm working on a black background and these flowers are outlined in black, I'm just going to ink the edges to either replace the line where I've cut it off or just to cover the white core of the cardstock. Graphic 45 has a white core, and sometimes on the darker patterns or elements you might want to ink the edges, and it just gives a nice finishing touch and makes the flower pop when you place it on any of your projects. The next thing that I'm going to do is shape those flowers. So you can see here I'm using a wooden barbecue skewer and just manipulating the paper, kind of trying to get it to ripple. It looks like those petals are sort of slightly fluted, and there's no right or wrong way to do this. It's all about looking at the flower that you're using and trying to give it a realistic shape. So you can do that in a number of ways. One of them is to do what I've just done, which was to give it a sort of fluted look, and then to give it a cup shape just slightly off camera. Here we go. I'm pressing into the center of that flower just to lift those petals up, and that is the first layer. So looking at that layer, I am now going to cut another of the flowers. So I'm trying to find one that's exactly the same as this one, and I'm going to cut out a second layer. Now when I was cutting out my flowers, I didn't throw all the scrap away. I kept the ones where I thought that I could cut out the element that I wanted to make that second layer. So you can see here I've got most of that top layer, but not quite enough, so I'm going to have a look through for another one. And here it is. So I'm going to cut out the element that I want. So I'm going to cut out this area of petal plus the flower centre in this instance, and carefully cut around the rest of the petal. I've slowed this down so you can see the detail, but you can also see how slowly I'm cutting this. And then again, I'm going to ink the edges. So I'm going to have black fingers at the end of this. And although I'm going to be showing you this on camera, I did the majority of the work with a tray on my knee and watching the TV and drinking coffee and eating cake, and it really was a nice way to get the work done. And it means you take your time, it means you're not too rushed, and you do get a nice result if you take your time in your cutting out. Again, I'm going to flute the petals and it's going to sit on top of the flower. Now this, you'll find that with your Graphic 45 papers you don't always get the exact same either size or flower unless you'll cut out flower for flower where it's duplicated. So because of the nature of this flower and lots of other flowers, it really doesn't matter. Because I'm going to just twist this slightly, it looks like I've got an even or even more layers of flower. And I'm going to be putting all of these flowers together with some silicone glue. Mine is by Pinflair, and I'm going to sit that flower where I think it's most pleasing, or that section of flower I think it's most pleasing, and that's given me a dimensional flower with which to decorate my heart. And once this is dry, the silicone glue will really support those flower petals. So just showing you that again. Try not to press too hard or you put a hole in the middle. Luckily this is going to be covered up by the second layer of petals. And then again cutting out the layer that I'm going to raise with the silicone glue. And just sort of lightly concertinaing the petal shape, adding the silicone glue, and positioning that second layer. So this is a slightly different style of poppy. I'm going to show you a couple just so you get the idea of the kinds of things to look out for when you are decoupaging your flowers. So I've this time just curved those edges back slightly because they kind of, if you look at the picture, they look like they're doing that naturally. Pressing a little bit in the center to get that cup shape, and then I'm looking for my second element. Again, pay attention to whether the details are on the left and right. And I thought, because I've going to show you a couple, this is another style of flower that's on that page, which looks a bit more like a bluebell. So I'm going to cut out that cup shape for the first flower. And then in order to make that cup shape more realistic, I'm going to remove this front piece of that cup or bell shape. Then I'm going to curve it, following what I think it would look like in real life, and then adding that to the centre. Now because I have cut this piece in half, I'm going to need to overlap it slightly. Now that doesn't matter. Normally decoupage you would put one piece directly on top of another and line them up, but because this is a sort of layered petal shape, it doesn't matter that I'm going to push the two shapes slightly overlapping so that I don't get a gap where so that you can't see where I've cut this. So you can see exactly what I'm doing here, just pushing one inside the other slightly. I need a little bit more glue to support what I'm doing. And don't forget this is going to dry nice and hard and really support this 3D shape once it's dry. So trying that again and forming that little cup shape, and then when you look at that from the front, it's just going to give it that realistic detail that brings these elements to life. There we go, lovely little cup shape. And this one's much easier. So I'm going to remove those front petals. You can see I've found one here. And then inking up the edges, curving it slightly, and then adding my glue and sitting on this second layer. And I really don't mind if you see the underneath layer because it just makes it look more dimensional. So another little tip just to keep you organised is once you've cut out all the different shapes of flowers, just put them in piles. Again, paying attention to some of the detail that might be on the left or the right, and some of the flowers might be the same flower but slightly smaller, depending on how the page has been designed. And by keeping them in their little groups, I know that I'm going to have pairs of details that I can cut out to add to a base flower and make it more dimensional. And I'm also sorting out those elements that I kept from cutting out the whole flowers and isolating the secondary pieces that I can use and putting them into the piles. And you can see here I've found one of those little flowers that I'm going to work on next. I wanted to show you this little teeny tiny one. Again, I only need that centre little section of petals in order to make this into a 3D shape. So I'm going to carefully cut around that. I'm literally using 2 layers to bring these poppies to life. So again, inking the edges, just cupping this little piece slightly. Need to be a little bit careful where I place the pin and flare. Don't want it to show once this piece is on, and then just sitting that on top of the flower. So now the flowers are setting, it's time to get back to the canvas. So I need to draw my design back in. This time I'm going to be using a chalk pastel from Faber-Castell. This is a pastel pencil or a chalk pencil, and I'm just sketching in the shape we had previously. I'm keeping the heart slightly to one side because I want a little bit of text in the bottom right hand corner. You can see I'm just tidying up my design as I go. So I'm using a little bit of that chalkboard paint. Now I will endeavour to get my wings more or less the same, but in nature you know they're not really, so I'm not too worried if one wing is slightly different shape to the other, just as long as they're roughly the same size. And this kind of took me back to days of scribbling in your, I think what would be called a planner today, but your jotter at school. And you know, if you liked a particular boy, you might do all sorts of romantic doodlings like this one. Actually, my favourite doodle at school was an eye, and I still like drawing eyes. I've never really perfected a face, but so So now I'm looking at some lace. I want to make a nice trim for the edge of the canvas, and I did cut this in half to make it go a little bit further, and you can see I'll use the other part of this lace around the heart a little bit later on. And before we carry on with the design, it might be worth you having a little dry run as I am here to make sure that you've got enough of those gorgeous flowers, or you might need to sit and cut a couple more to finish your design, and also you get a feel for the way these flowers are going to nestle together. I really don't want any of that background showing too much in between, so I really want to nestle them against one another and create a lovely textured flowery heart in the centre of this design. Actually, it's not in the centre, but for the focus of this design. I might need to cut a couple more, but we'll see. I've got a bit more paper, so I can do that. The other thing that I'm going to do is have a band across the heart, so that would cover up my gaps, but I think I'm going to go for covering them all up. I'll just cut a couple more if I need to. So off with the flowers and on with the doilies. And I've got a couple of these doilies that my mum has had for absolutely years and years and years, sitting in a cupboard, and I rescued them from her because I knew that they would work out really well for my mixed media projects. And you can see here I'm just deciding where they're going to sit. So I only used one doily, so I haven't made much of a dent in my supply, and I'm going to attach them to the canvas with a little bit of matte medium, bearing in mind that I'm going to cover the edges of the canvas. I'm not too worried about those edges, but I'm just getting a little pattern with the doilies on the front of the canvas. Now you may think that actually these look quite nice as they are, and if you like them like that you can leave them like that, but I've got another little trick up my sleeve that I want to share with you. So I've got two pieces of doily in the corners and two along little pieces along the edge. Actually, I got quite a nice pattern on my glue mat. I don't know if you noticed that there. And then I'm covering the whole lot with some more of the black chalkboard paint. So in order not to have any edges, I am going back over the canvas as I cover up all of those areas of doily. And I'm going to need to do a second coat, so drying this one off and then I will do a second coat. So working with a little bit of gesso on my messy mat, I am lightly loading my finger with a very tiny, I'm almost using my finger as a dry brush. That's how little paint I have got on my finger. Don't worry too much about the edges, we can tidy those up afterwards, or you might just like to leave them messy. It depends the look you're going for. I end up going for a sort of slightly neater look, and so I do tidy up the edges, and you can see I'm just brushing it over the doily and it picks up that detail beautifully. I really was pleased with how this turned out. Now I start out by adding a little bit of this paint or gesso around the border, but you don't actually end up being able to see that once I add the lace, so it's entirely optional. You don't really need to do that little section if you don't want to. Just coming back in and adding a little bit more paint to those doilies to really make them pop, and then back in with the chalkboard paint just to tidy up the edges. And how pretty does that look? It looks a lot more delicate doing it this way than just leaving the doilies untreated. So time to cover up the edges. I've got some 3/4 of an inch strips of the poppy paper, and I have got my lace already trimmed. So I'm adding the lace with some strong double-sided tape. You could use glue if you want to, but I find it's a little bit messy, and I like to use the strong double-sided tape. So I'm just running it so it just sits slightly over the, or wraps slightly over the edge or around the edge of the canvas, and gives me that lovely delicate lacy finish. This lace, in case you're interested, is a lace from Creative Expressions, and it's got a funny name beginning with G, Gupier lace, something like that, and it's a lovely, almost like a crocheted lace it looks like. I know it's not, but that's what it kind of reminds me of. So I'm trying to get it as even as possible and wrapping the entire canvas. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is add the strips of paper. Unfortunately, I do have to join the paper as I work around, so I'm not starting in a corner. I just want the paper to cover the edges of my canvas with as few joins as possible. Again, I'm using that strong double-sided tape to hold the paper in place. I've cut this one a little bit wide, so I'm just trimming it off with my craft knife. And then once you've got everything in position, just run right around your canvas with your bone folder, making sure that everything is pressed down well against the edge of the canvas. So next you want to take all of your flowers and start to arrange them on your canvas. I'm going to work from the top down, and you know, the whole time that I was gluing these into position, I kept seeing little bits of glitter on the edge of the glue bottle, and you'll see me spot it in a little while. And the whole time that I've been gluing things down for the past couple of days, I've noticed this sparkle, and I kept thinking I just got a bit of glitter onto the top of the glue, but actually it is a glitter glue that I have been using and am using at the moment. Luckily, I'm only putting little dots of glue underneath the flowers, so none of it actually showed, so I didn't spoil my work, but I do realise a bit later on what's actually going on. So you can see I'm working a little section at a time, overlapping those flowers, and I'm kind of working in symmetry, so you'll see that I've got a centre line of flowers running straight down the middle, and then on either side I'm using the same flowers to fill in the corresponding gaps. And I've got a pleasing effect this way. You could work more randomly if you wanted to. It might not suit the flowers that you've been cutting out, and the aim is to cover the entire heart. Now, I did put an extra chalky looking outline on the heart, thinking I was going to leave it like that, but you'll see that I end up using lace instead, and I like the effect much better. So I haven't told you to do that, so just ignore it. Just go with your chalk line if you are following this tutorial. And how fabulous does that look? I was really, really pleased. It was really worth sitting there for all that time cutting out those flowers. The next thing that I'm going to show you how to do is how to make feathers, and I want the feathers to be the same pattern on both sides. So I've got this couple of sheets of ABC primer that the paper is called Bedtime Stories. I'm going to get rid of the bedtime stories and work with the dots. And I've just drawn a freehand, what looks like a banana, but when I've finished, I hope you'll agree it will look like a feather. So I started out with some slightly longer feathers to start with, and they're roughly between 3 and 4 inches long, and they're going to be the feathers at the bottom of the wings. So I worked in 5s and ended up with enough feathers to cover the wings. And again, this is a job I did in front of the TV, and I'm just going to show you the steps and leave it to you how you are going to cut yours out, whether you're going to sit at your craft desk or whether you're going to sit and watch something on the TV or even on YouTube as you cut these out. It will take you probably a couple of hours to get all these done, and it was the same with the flowers. So if in any way your paper is tearing as you cut these leaves out, it just means that you need to leave the gel medium to dry a little bit longer before you cut them out. You can see I've outlined them with a black pen, and I'm going to do everything that I do on one side, I'm going to do on the other side. So I'm adding in and drawing this to look like a feather. So I'm adding a center line, I'm outlining the feather, and then I'm coming in, making sure that you do this the right way around each time, drawing in the lines that make it look like a feather. I'm going to slow that down in a second. I'm just giving you an overview first of what I'm doing, and then I will show you in a little close-up shot exactly the detail of creating each of these feathers, and I make them progressively smaller as I work up the wings. So I'm inking the edges of the feathers, and then I'm going to fold the feather in half along that line. Starts to give it dimension straight away, and then it's all about the cutting, and I'm just fringing either side of the feather. So in effect I'm making a paper version of a feather as near as I can. So I'm trying to keep these little snips as close together as I can in order to make a more realistic paper feather. And you may want to just slightly angle your scissors and cut in to the feather just to make them not as perfect as they start out life. It just makes them look a little bit more realistic. So you can see how they're going to line up on the heart or on the wings once they are done. So I might end up only using 4 of these long feathers, but I'm going to start out with 5, so hopefully I'll have enough once I've cut these out, and I'll gradually make them shorter as I sort of work up the wings. So what I'm doing is making them, just laying them out roughly on the wings and then making a few more. So here we go. I've cut out that banana shape. I'm roughly outlining the feather and putting in that center spine of the feather. It's probably got a better name than that. Is it a quill? Maybe it might be a quill, not sure. But you know, the bit in the middle that holds all the fluffy bits on the outside. And then I'm going to put in the little feather bits themselves. You can see I'm not taking too much time, not being too precious, just giving a sketchy look of a feather. Remember, once you flip it over, to make sure that you're working in the same direction. So if you turn your feather as you outline it, make sure you just check on the back to make sure that you angle the little feathery bits in the same direction as you did on the front. Okay. Then it's time to ink the edges. And last but not least, you're going to just fold the feather along that center line, just to give it some shape. You could actually use them like this if you're not into all that fringing, but it really does finish them off a treat to feather them. And I find it easier to feather from the top to the bottom, and in order to be able to do that you need to flip your feather over when you're cutting the opposite side. It will work out differently if you're a left-handed person, but I drag the scissors towards myself as I cut the fringing. And the reason for inking them again is it just fluffs them up a little bit. And don't forget, cutting in at an angle just to break up that line on the outside edge of the feather adds to the natural look. Now, before we tackle the wings, you need to decide whether or not you're going to outline your heart with some more of that gorgeous lace. So this lace was actually twice the width, and I cut carefully along the pattern, which gave me sort of twice the use for my lace than I would have done otherwise. It took me a couple of minutes, but it was worth the effort, and I think that's going to look lovely tucked around there, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm starting out by adding some thin double-sided tape to the lace. Make sure if you've got a right and a wrong side that these are very similar, but that you're working on the side of your lace or the wrong side of your lace. Make sure that that tape is pressed down well, and then I'm going to start just checking that all of my, oh, that's one that I didn't glue in, all of my edges of the flowers are a little bit loose, so I just use the craft knife to release them a little bit. And then I'm starting at the top, excuse my fringe, and I am creating a couple of little pleats as I work around the curve of the heart, and I'm really trying to make sure that the edge of that lace is tucked underneath those flowers. And once you get past this point, you can pretty much work with the lace straight down to the point. So I'm just going to leave it a second before I trim it off, because I haven't worked out yet how I'm going to tackle that bottom bit. Tucking that flower back in, and then I'm coming back down the opposite side of the heart. So again, adding the strong double-sided tape, just trimming the edges so that they're neat, and then coming around the other side of the heart. Just make sure before you start that you have checked that you can tuck that underneath all your little flowers. Again, coming in from the top, adding a couple of little pleats as I work my way round. Trying not to fold the flowers as I tuck the lace underneath. Once I reached the bottom, I decided to add another little pleat in the piece of lace coming round from the left. So I'm going to trim this one off, and then a little tiny fold in there and overlap the lace, and it will hopefully look like one continuous piece. And I do add a little bit of glue to keep that in place. And that's when I realised that one of these was a sparkle glue, and switched back to the normal glue. Now you might want to do a dry run with your feathers before you start. I'm just sorting them into sizes before I get going. And another thing to note is that some of your feathers will be curving to the right and some will be curving to the left. So pay attention to what fits the best on the wing shapes that you have drawn. So starting out with the bottom layer, and I end up using 4 feathers for this layer. I'm just taking off the top because they were a little bit long, so I'm just pinching them off. I know that they're going to be covered up, and I'm adding glue only to the tops of the feathers because I want them to look like they're nice and bouncy and free to flap about if they were flying for real. So it's worth working out each layer before you start, and again, if you decide your feathers are a bit long, you can just pinch the tops off, because only the very top layer will show that top section of the feather. So I'm overlapping the feathers as I go, and again remembering to curve them in the direction you think they would be sitting on the wing. So if the curve's going the wrong way, flip the feather over and it will be going the right way. And then by the time you get to the top of the wing, I ended up with 4 little feathers and just had to trim the tops of the feathers off a little bit in order to get the right shape. And you can see me doing that here, so I'm just curving off the top of those feathers in order to fit in the outline that I've created at the curve, or for the curve on the top of the wing. So you can see actually one wig is slightly fatter than the other, but hey ho, it's nature. So the next thing that I'm doing is adding some thin ribbon just to finish off the edge of my canvas. So I've got double-sided tape on the ribbon, and then I'm just wrapping it around the canvas. Now I could have done this in one long piece, and you may choose to do that. I didn't think about it till afterwards. Just peel off a little bit of the tape at a time and work on each side as you go. And I did this because I just wanted to cover the edge of that paper. I should have inked it and I probably wouldn't have needed the ribbon, but I quite like how the ribbon just finishes everything off, and again it's just a little bit of extra detail. And in with a paintbrush and just getting rid of that little bit. You could only see a little bit of the sketching that I'd done with the gesso around the heart. It just didn't quite look right. And the other thing that I'm not quite happy with was the colour of the gesso on the lace. So you can see I'm going to come back in with some cream paint, some slightly off-white paint, to match the doily colour to the lace a little bit better. So just tidying up my canvas. So I've cut a strip of card to go across my heart at a slight angle, not my heart on my canvas, and it's 1 3/4 inches wide, and I'm going to cover it in the same Faber-Castell blackboard paint. I've cut this strip slightly longer than I need because I want to give it some dimension, and I'm also going to give it a lace edge. So I'm just adding some double-sided tape to the wrong side of my strip, and I'm doing that on both sides. And then again, I'm going to use those extra bits of lace that I had from wrapping the canvas around the edges. Just making sure that the lace is straight and then trimming it off. And you can see how pretty that looks once we flip it over. Looks nice like that. Looks even nicer like that. With all the fussy cutting entailed in this project, it did take me a couple of days to get this done, and you'll see now that the light's changed, I'm working into the evening here. I've printed out my sentiment on the computer and I sort of measured it up to make sure that it was going to fit where I wanted it to. And a little trick that I've showed you before is to take your chalk or pastel pencil and scribble on the back of your design, and then once you've done that, center it on the ribbon strip that we've created and take a ballpoint pen or something nice and sharp and draw around your design. This is what we used to do when we used tracing paper in days gone by, and we're doing it with the chalk in order to be able to see on the black background that we're working on. And I'm also doing that for this other little piece that's going in the bottom right hand corner. So position this where you want it. I'm using my ruler to get it in the right place, and then it's exactly the same as you did on the strip, just trace around your letters to transfer the design onto your canvas. And it's really easy to transfer your design. Now I could have left it like that, but I am going to go over it with paint just to make sure that it's really permanent on this canvas. When I decided that the white wasn't working for me, that's when I got out a little bit of this mushroom coloured acrylic paint, and you can see I'm just going over that design, and exactly the same way as I did before, just adding a little bit of cream into that mix just to or mushroom as it happens, just to make it a little bit less obviously white. And I'm going to use the same paint in order to paint in the letters on the design. I quite liked the fact that I did this again because it really did pick out the detail on those doilies. Now if you don't get on with paint, you could use a white pen to do your lettering if you want, or if you like the sort of chalky look of the pastel pencil, you can leave it like that as well. You could actually sharpen your pencil and darken it by going over it again, actually writing over your traced image. But I quite like going over this in paint, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. And just remember, if you do make a mistake, you can just paint over it in the black again and start all over. You can reuse your template, just scribble over the back of it again and then retransfer once that black paint is dry. So give it a go. If you're a little bit scared about using the paint, have a little practice, because it's no great shakes if you get it wrong, and you can always resort to the pen afterwards, and at least you've tried and perhaps improved your brush skills by giving it a go. The other thing to remember is once that paint is dry, you can touch up any areas where perhaps you've been a little bit heavy-handed, and come back in and just sort of make your lines a little bit thinner by using a black pen, and you'll see that I'm going to do that. And make sure everything is nice and dry, and then just come in and tidy up any little errors in your brushing skills, and no one will ever know. Shh, I won't tell if you won't. I've put my hot glue gun on, and now it's time to make this little banner fit across our heart. So I'm just folding it on one edge to start with, and it's more of a curve than a fold, as you can see here, and that's just going to push this little banner away from the hearts and make it look like it's wrapped around that poppy covered heart. So I'm just trimming this end off so that they're both the same, and then I'm going to get out my hot glue. Add the glue to the underside of one side of the banner first, and then hold that into position for a second or two while the glue sets. So you're trying to press down without completely crunching the fact that you've rounded that area, and come in and glue the other side. And I slightly pushed these two together, you can't really catch that on camera, just to curve it up a little bit more away from the flowers. And if you feel you just need to give it that little bit extra push underneath, just use a pair of scissors or a pencil or something, tuck them underneath and push down into that glue while it's still setting. And then last but not least, I'm going to add a little flower to that banner. And obviously this is going to need to dry, but it was just a thought at the end. I thought it would look nice, and I'm quite happy now that the canvas is finished to let this sit on one side for this little bit of silicone glue to dry. So you can see again, I'm just adding that cupped detail onto the flower to complete it and give it all that lovely dimension. So it's time to get looking through your papers to see exactly what you've got in your stash. And I wouldn't put it past you to have exactly the same papers as me, in which case you're more than welcome to copy this design. But if not, all is not lost. Have a look through your collections and you will find papers that you can do this with. I know for a fact that Tropical Travelogue have got some gorgeous flower papers that you can add dimension to your heart with and give this a totally tropical feel. There's a close-up of the technique that I showed you using the doily, and a close-up of all that lovely fussy cutting, and I hope you agree that it was worth it. So stay tuned to the end of the video for any links back to my blog where you can see the whole audition piece, and there will be videos to go with each of the projects, or most of the projects that I will be posting for this audition piece. At least that's the plan at the moment. This is the first piece complete, and I will be sharing that before the 20th of March. That's the closing date for this audition. So wish me luck as I try out for the Graphic 45 Design Team 2016. Till next time, thank you for watching. So as promised, here are the links. You can click on the iCard or the link in the description box down below to see the full audition piece over on my blog. If not, you might want to check out my Graphic 45 playlist where you can see all the videos that I've made for pieces that I've created for auditions past and present. You can see all the fun that I have. If I don't actually get through, I do have a ton of fun making these projects for these auditions. But really keep your fingers crossed for me and wish me luck as I audition once again for the Graphic 45 Design Team 2016.